Rome, a city of faith and power. And at its heart, a museum with secrets dark and strange. Tales of barbarous acts of violence, clashing egos, and scandalous censorship. Here you can uncover messages from the past and reopen dark chapters from history. Secrets hidden in plain sight inside the Vatican Museums. In the middle of Rome stands the Vatican, the epicenter of Catholicism. It is both a fortified city and a place the Pope calls home. It also houses one of the most famous museums in the world, full of timeless treasures, each one with a story to tell. Of all of these, none are more famous than the Sistine Chapel. All who enter here gaze up at the luminous frescoes of Michelangelo. What few people know is that his masterpiece was an afterthought. When the chapel was constructed, the walls were filled with monumental murals. But the ceiling was just decorated with a simple field of stars. 30 years later, Pope Julius II decided it needed a new paint job. When he gave the task to Michelangelo, he took a leap of faith, because the artist was not then a famous painter, but an up-and-coming sculptor of the human form. His transformation of the ceiling, an area the size of 2 basketball courts, would be completed in just 4 years. How did a brilliant but inexperienced painter complete the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in such a short time? 500 years later, when Vatican staff embarked on a restoration project, they got the chance to uncover this museum secret.
My name is Maurizio De Luca, and I'm the director of the restoration at the Vatican Museum. I worked there from 43 years.
The restoration team spent 9 years up under the ceiling in the 1980s. It took them twice as long to clean the ceiling as it did Michelangelo to paint it.
The possibility that we put our hand on the plaster, on the Michelangelo painting, allowed us to investigate more and more his technique.
L'affresco prevedeva una serie di procedure che non dovevano essere viste dalla distanza, ma noi, salendo vicino e stando così vicino agli affreschi, possiamo invece leggere in tutta la loro evidenza.
The largest figures on the ceiling are nearly 20 feet across. Michelangelo did not attempt to paint them freehand. Each figure started as a sketch or cartoon, followed by a procedure that art experts like William Wallace refer to as pouncing.
Pouncing is the means of transferring the cartoon to the plaster. So the cartoon has actually been pricked with little tiny holes, and the charcoal dust in a bag is actually pounced or pounded onto the cartoon. Okay, we see the head beautifully pounced and the hand beautifully pounced.
But pouncing was a slow process. and Michelangelo was under pressure from an aging pope who wanted to see the ceiling completed before he died. So Michelangelo exchanged the charcoal for a blade, allowing him to quickly incise the lines of the sketch directly onto the plaster.
And these are the kinds of things you can see all across the ceiling when you're looking at it in raking light. Michelangelo's incised marks.
The artist had good reason to heed the Pope's demand for speed.
Unlike our idea of the papacy today, Pope Julius II, who was known as the warrior pope, was an extremely active personality, literally leading the papal armies into war.
Michelangelo may have respected the Pope, but he was not the type of man to be intimidated.
I think you could say about Pope Julius and Michelangelo, they're both megalomaniacs.
There were bound to be some clashes between these titans.
The Pope wanted constantly to know when Michelangelo was going to finish, and Michelangelo's famous response was, "When it's done." At which point, the Pope actually picked up a stick and started beating Michelangelo. "When it's done," he says.
To get it done, Michelangelo would endure far more physical torment than the occasional beating from an aging pope. On a scaffold, 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, constantly craning his neck up, paint dripping into his eyes, no one can say Michelangelo didn't suffer for art. In the 4th year of his labor, he even described it in a poem. "With my neck puffed out like a pigeon, belly hanging like an empty sack, beard pointed at the ceiling, and my brain fallen backwards in my head." Michelangelo kept going because he was tough and determined. But that doesn't explain how he could work on a scaffold just a few feet from the ceiling, and yet paint figures in perfect perspective when seen from far below. The answer may be because he started his career as a sculptor.
When Michelangelo imagines a figure moving, it's moving inwards, outwards in space, and therefore it creates this wonderful perspective. People ask all the time, is that real? Is the architecture real? Are they sticking out of the ceiling? Are they 3D?
If one removes the frescoes from the ceiling, Michelangelo's mastery of perspective becomes even more impressive. He works magic with his paints, creating lifelike 3D figures even when the background tilts the wrong way.
Jonah was painted on a piece of plaster that tilts towards us. And yet, looking at the figure, Jonah appears to tilt backwards. Was something that he knew would fly in the face of all the people that had criticized him at the beginning of the assignment, saying, "Oh, but Michelangelo doesn't know anything about painting." Michelangelo denies the laws of physics through his painting. It's the same kind of special effect that people marvel at in something like Avatar.
So how did Michelangelo complete his masterpiece in just 4 years? Determination, physical endurance, and 3D virtuosity are only part of the answer. The rest is surely, quite simply, genius.
Michelangelo is more responsible than any other artist in the history of the world for raising the stature of artists. This is the beginning of an artist actually establishing his own criteria.
Every morning when the gates open, thousands of visitors head straight to the Sistine Chapel to stand for a moment in a place that combines the power of God and the genius of man. These galleries have always hosted crowds of curious visitors, but there was a time when they came in violence, clamoring for the Pope's blood. At first sight, it's easy to forget that the Vatican's Swiss guards are highly trained elite mercenaries, dedicated for the last 500 years to defend the life of the Pope. Never was their duty more tested than in 1527, during a bloody standoff in Rome. 500 years later, the Vatican Museums still bear the scars. Here in the former papal apartments, decorated by one of the masters of the Renaissance, Raphael, art restorer Paolo Violini spends every day cleaning the 500-year-old frescoes.
I've been working here in Raphael room for 15 years, more or less. Before the cleaning, we didn't know the color of the eyes. Now we can see that are blue. It's really beautiful.
The discoveries come in all forms.
We restored this fresco more than 10 years ago, and we found some damages on the faces of the popes and also many graffiti. One of them, we can see the name of Luther.
Luther was a German monk excommunicated for challenging the authority of the Pope. How did his name end up incised on a fresco in the papal apartments? These frescoes were painted during the artistic golden age in the Vatican. Popes were pouring money into glorifying the papacy. Such extravagance was exactly what Luther and his German Protestant supporters detested about the Church. Professor Paul Gwynne investigates this period of history.
Luther had been to Rome and been disgusted at what he'd seen. He'd spread the word in his homeland, in Germany, that Rome needed reform.
The religious tensions would come to a head unexpectedly when an army of the most powerful ruler in Europe, the Holy Roman Emperor, descended on Rome.
In terms of numbers, we're talking in the region of 20,000 troops, swelled by German mercenaries.
The commander was there for political reasons, but his unruly troops had other goals in mind and quickly took matters into their own hands.
The attack starts at 4 o'clock in the morning. The assault is done virtually in a mist. People on the walls can't see them coming.
This was the first time Rome had been invaded on this scale in 500 years.
Okay, we're in modern Piazza San Pietro, and of course St. Peter's and the Pope were the object of the imperial troops. And they were streaming through, screaming and shouting for the Pope's blood. The papal defenders were shouting back equal obscenities, Lutherans, sons of whores, etc. Absolute chaos. Panic sets in, the Swiss Guard is summoned, and the Pope prepares to leave.
The Pope's Swiss Guard had been trained for moments like this, but on this day they are seriously outnumbered.
A great battle takes place in which 80%, three-quarters of the Swiss Guard are cruelly massacred. They defend the Pope to a man. This was close hand-to-hand combat, fought with daggers, knives and halberds. It would have been absolutely gory, blood everywhere.
As the Swiss Guard falls, the Pope manages to escape down this passage, the Passetto, which links the Vatican to a well-fortified castle.
The Pope picked up his skirts and ran the length of the Passetto. The imperial troops were lined up down here waiting for him, hoping to get a pot shot as they could spy him through the narrow arrow chutes. Now you see him, now you don't. It must have been something like a papal duck shoot.
The Pope ended up here, the Castel Sant'Angelo, while citizens outside were being massacred and tortured.
We hear stories of cardinals being whipped naked through the streets, men being forced to eat their own testicles, for example. Also, the tombs of the popes were desecrated and their bodies pulled from their coffins.
What kind of men were responsible for this brutality? On the other side of the city, Paul may have found the answer.
We are in the luxury suburban villa of the papal banker. We've come here today particularly to look at the graffiti that was left on the walls as the imperial troops marched through. 1528 is the year, anno. Was soll ich schreibes und nicht lachen. Die Landsnicht haben den Papst laufen machen. Why am I, who is writing, not allowed to laugh? The Landsnicht are the ones who have put the Pope Papst to flight. The Landsnicht, German mercenaries, were feared throughout the 15th and 16th centuries as the crack infantry.
These much-feared troops had reasons to vandalize the Raphael rooms in the Vatican.
The Landsnicht were the pro-Lutheran sympathizers. Luther himself had thought of Rome as a cesspool, as a place that needed dramatic reformation, and the Landsnicht were out to do it for themselves. So I think we can make the case very strongly that the people who inscribed on the walls of the Raphael rooms and the people who wrote here were one and the same.
After 8 months under siege, the Pope paid a ransom for his own life and was allowed to escape to safety. But the sack of Rome had brutally taken the lives of 80% of the inhabitants of the city. Rome wouldn't recover for the better part of a century. Next, a cover-up campaign at the Vatican Museums, and the shocking truth of what lies beneath. The Vatican collections are housed in 9 museums. Treasures the popes have amassed over the last 500 years. Classical Greek and Roman statues fill dozens of galleries. Many of them are totally nude.
Well, this statue, it's the famous Apollo del Belvedere, one of the founding pieces of the Vatican Museum in the collection set by Pope Julius II.
Evidently, Pope Julius had no issue with displaying this ancient god in all his glory.
He wanted to bring back on fashion all the classic values: nudity, male bodies, perfection, ideal representation. That's the Renaissance goals.
The beauty of the human body wasn't only showcased in the ancient art that the Pope was collecting, but also in the new art that he was commissioning in the early years of the 16th century. Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling is a cornucopia of nudity.
And if you look at Michelangelo's portrayal of Adam and Eve, we have quite an interesting juxtaposition there of Eve's face and Adam's genitalia. In fact, if you flick her head 180 degrees, the fruit of forbidden knowledge becomes quite a different mouthful.
Nudity and art went hand in hand, even in such a sacred space. But it wouldn't be long before overexposure became an issue. 20 years after he completed the ceiling, Michelangelo painted the Last Judgment on the altar wall of the Sistine Chapel. It was raising eyebrows before it was even finished. The Pope's Chamberlain, Biagio da Cesena, complained about the amount of nudity, saying it was better suited to a brothel or a bathhouse. On hearing this, the headstrong Michelangelo sent his critic to hell.
Michelangelo actually puts Biagio da Cesena as one of the judges of the underworld. He's given ass's ears and he's immortalized in the Sistine.
Today, much of the original nudity has been carefully covered over, but not by Michelangelo. The censor was a new pope, His Holiness Pope Pius V.
Pope Pius was so much offended by that genital nudity in the Pope's palace that he decided that he couldn't even bear to look at it.
His concern? Nothing less than the survival of Catholicism itself. Times were changing. With the Protestant Reformation, there were demands for a more modest church. And some things were just unacceptable. There was an official ruling. No more genital nudity in the visual arts.
There is, of course, a famous myth that somewhere in the Vatican there is a drawer of penises that have been knocked off by an angry pope with a chisel one night. That's probably not the case. Remember that any statue falling, any piece that sticks out is vulnerable.
The popes may not have gone so far as to castrate their statues, but they certainly had them covered up. The Bible was consulted, and a solution was found in the story of Adam and Eve covering themselves with fig leaves after eating the forbidden fruit. And so the censorship of nudity in the Vatican became known as the Fig Leaf Campaign. Hundreds of ancient statues received strategically placed foliage.
It became an absolute must. Fig leaves, underwears, draperies, whatever. I mean, it became normal to not accept nudity anymore.
One of the Fig Leaf Campaign's first targets was Michelangelo's Last Judgment. Soon after the artist's death, the Pope ordered the offending flesh covered up. It would take a new ruling by a daring Pope to restore this masterpiece to its former glory, or to remove the fig leaves throughout the museums. Only then would these ancients be allowed to let it all hang out again. Next, an exclusive journey into the Vatican's secret archives, where lost transcripts recount tales of sodomy, heresy, and burning at the stake. Down the hall from the Vatican Museums is the secret archives, an exclusive and underexplored collection of historical documents, rarely seen on television. It was dramatically depicted in the blockbuster film Angels and Demons as a high-tech fortress with low oxygen chambers and bulletproof glass. In reality, the most high-tech contraption is an antiquated elevator, and most documents are held in a no-frills cement bunker. But on its 25 miles of bookshelves are documents that shaped the world. Galileo's signed confession, Henry VIII's request to divorce his first wife, and a Napoleonic treaty. In 2001, a miscatalogued 700-year-old parchment was discovered here. It revealed surprising details behind one of the most infamous stories of the Middle Ages, the demise of the Knights Templar. The Knights Templar were founded in the 12th century as an elite religious fighting force to protect the Holy Land during the Crusades.
From the very beginning, the Templars were made dependent only from the authority of the Pope, meaning they didn't have to answer to any local authority.
The Templars were fabulously wealthy, owning land, controlling trade, even running treasuries. But back in Europe, their wealth brought them enemies, very powerful enemies. The King of France, Philip IV, who was seriously in debt, wanted to bring them down.
He wanted their estates, he wanted their cash. All the stops were pulled out in order to see this to completion.
Even if that meant bypassing the authority of Pope Clement V. King Philip spread rumors about their secret initiation rites. rumors of illicit sexual acts, spitting on the image of Christ, and idolatry.
It was a huge, effective propaganda machine.
Rumors soon became accusations. King Philip arrested almost 200 Templars, including the Grand Master of the Order himself, Jacques de Molay.
And he was accused of denial of Christ, idolatry, and sodomy. It seems that he was tortured in order to obtain a confession.
The medievals had various horrific means of extracting confessions.
The most common one was the torture of rope. Another one was the torture of fire. Finally, there was the wheel.
Under torture, many confessed to heresy, a crime punishable by life in prison or execution. In an effort to determine how accurate these confessions were, the Pope held an independent trial of the Templar leaders in Chinon, France. The original transcript of that trial was lost, until now.
Before the discovery, there were different theories suggesting that the Pope didn't do his best to save the temple.
But the parchment in the secret archives, in its original Latin, tells us a different story. Knight Jacques de Molay, great master of the Templar Order, came before us. He described his initiation ceremony. He said he did not spit on the cross, but only close to it. As for the vice of sodomy, the head-shaped idol, and the illicit kissings, he denied any knowledge. This parchment also records the verdict of the Church. It found Jacques de Molay guilty of sexual immorality and corruption, but not of heresy, and so not liable for execution.
I don't believe that before the discovery of the Chinon parchment, anybody suspected or had even anticipated that the Pope had gone this openly to attempt absolution. He didn't want to see the Templar wealth going to Philip. He did not want to lose his military arm.
This document should have saved the Templars, but in the end, the King of France proved too powerful, and Pope Clement V too weak.
As a pope who had been appointed by the King of France, was really virtually the king's man.
So 4 years after Chinon, the Pope dissolved the Knights Templar, stripping them of papal protection. King Philip of France seized the moment. On this island in Paris, he ordered Jacques de Molay burned at the stake.
The Spanish have their bullfights, and in Europe, nothing was better than burning people at the stake. It was a great means of attracting a crowd.
It was the end of the Knights Templar, but Jacques de Molay had the last word.
It is said that in his dying moments, he cursed both the king and the Pope, saying that they would die within the year. The Pope died within a month, and the King of France died within 2 months of the burning of Jacques de Molay.
The significance of this parchment leaves you wondering just how many other documents there are buried in the secret archives, waiting to be dusted off to set the historical record straight. Next, one of the museum's treasures is sent to hospital to investigate a 2,000-year-old mystery. In the heart of the Vatican Museum complex is the Gregorian Egyptian Museum, a large collection from ancient Egypt, which includes gifts from an Egyptian ruler to the Pope. Unusual gifts, consisting of human mummies. Behind the scenes at the museum, these have become the focus of the Vatican Mummy Project, led by curator and Egyptologist Dr. Alessia Amenta.
The mummy is like a treasure chest containing all these data about ancient life, who can help us to understand how these people were living, what they were eating, which was their social rank, and the diseases they were suffering at that time.
Now curators have decided it's time to open this human treasure chest and learn its secrets. This means one last journey for this delicate time traveler.
We are very worried about every kind of movements.
Too much movement, and this 2,000-year-old corpse could crumble to dust.
We hope that she will not move at all. It's a risky operation for us.
Mummification was an ancient art.
The ancient Egyptians were believing that without the body they couldn't live in the afterlife. So this was the most important thing for them.
But mummification doesn't last forever.
She was removed from the Gregorian Egyptian Museum in 1991 because it was very damaged. And as you can see, all the ribs and vertebrae coming out from this big tear from the back.
The curators decided to try and restore her.
Usually mummies are not restored because it's very complicated. We were lucky because we can collect all the vertebrae and we can create again the vertebral column.
They then rewrapped her using the very same linen wrappings that had begun to decay. The result? She looks like she was mummified just yesterday. But before putting her back on display in the museum, Alessia wants to gain a better understanding of her life. What little they do know comes from her burial coverings.
We know something about her because on these coverings there is written her name, Nimatre. She was living in the 2nd century BC in Fayum Oasis, probably from the town of Hawara. We don't know any more about her.
In order to find out more about Nimatre, Alessia has decided to check her into a local hospital. After 2,000 years, this Egyptian woman is about to share her deepest secrets with us.
The CT scan is the most important step for a study of a mummy because it gives a lot of information about wrappings, about the diet of this person, and at what stage she was dying and why.
100 times more powerful than a regular X-ray, a CT scan uses radiation to produce detailed three-dimensional images of the insides of a body. This is the first time they've had a mummy on the hospital premises. She's drawn quite a crowd.
Vedi, posti di galleria.
Dr. Francesco Danza is the radiographer who interprets the CT scans. Usually, of course, his patients are alive.
We can see very clearly the reconstruction of the spine that the men in museum have done. We also had the confirmation of this technique to make the skull empty.
Sometimes they are taking out the brain from the eye, sometimes extracting here from the nose directly.
Egyptians believed that knowledge came from the heart, so they had no use for the brain in the afterlife. Generally, it was pulled out in pieces through the nostrils and discarded.
Siamo sicuri che è femmina?
Ha fatto lei? L'ha fatto lui apposta? O telefono all'antropologo? Probably some pieces of wrappings together with the resins used for the embalming.
The CAT scan shows teeth and newly matured bones that suggest that this lady was only about 20 years old when she died. As to how she died so young, they find a clue in some abnormal patterning on her skull. The doctors find thin lines radiating out from her skull marrow, which look like hairs standing on end. They are caused by changes in the bone and suggest Nimat Ray suffered from anemia due to poor nutrition or a parasitic infection. This could be what killed her. For Alessia, this little insight into Nimat Ray's life is bittersweet.
Don't forget that these were a person who were loving and had a normal life, because in a museum they become an artifact, but they are not. They are really people, and so you get involved during this kind of work, so it's not always so easy.
Nimat Ray is the first of 9 mummies under investigation at the Vatican Museums. Restoring them and piecing together their identities one by one, the Vatican Mummy Project is rescuing these ancient Egyptians from crumbling into obscurity. Next, another ancient death at the Vatican Museums. But this time, death by snakes. Here at the Vatican Museums, the magnificent marble sculptures have enthralled artists, popes, and tourists for centuries. One of its founding pieces is that of a pagan priest and his sons in the fight of their lives. Most everyone has heard the legend of the fall of Troy. But not everyone knows about the one man who wasn't fooled by the Trojan horse and tried to prevent the disaster. Laocoon. After besieging the city of Troy for years, the Greeks had left a giant wooden horse filled with troops outside the city walls.
Laocoon, as one of the high priests of the city, rushes outside the city walls and tries to persuade the Trojans to ignore it and not bring it into the city. Quid id est timeo Danaos et dona ferentes, he says. Whatever it is, I don't like it, and I don't like Greeks bearing gifts. He throws a spear at the belly of the horse. It resounds, and at that moment, he is punished by the gods.
The punishment appears in the form of 2 huge serpents that emerge from the sea and set upon Laocoon and his 2 sons.
All 3 are horribly strangled. They are killed. The Trojans are terrified. They think that Laocoon is being punished for wounding the horse, and they drag the horse inside. Troy is destroyed.
The great marble statue depicting Laocoon and his sons was discovered underground near Rome in 1506. It was an instant sensation.
Because of the dramatic nature of the discovery and because of the mania for collecting ancient sculpture, Pope Julius II had it removed to the Vatican and became part of the Vatican collections.
Many artists of the time, including Michelangelo, were awestruck by the Laocoon. But where did it come from? And who had carved it?
It was immediately identified as the great sculpture group of Laocoon, described by the Roman writer Pliny the Elder.
Pliny the Elder was a 1st century Roman historian who wrote of an extraordinary Laocoon statue carved by 3 artists. Most experts believe this was the same sculpture that had been lost for 1,500 years. But one art historian caused a stir recently when she suggested this wasn't the statue Pliny described at all, but a fake, created by none other than Michelangelo. Antique forgery has been a lucrative business for hundreds of years and was practiced by some of the best-known artists in the Renaissance, including Michelangelo.
I think it's a very interesting suggestion that Michelangelo was the carver of the Laocoon. We know that Michelangelo was responsible partly for helping put it back together. And the idea that he may have actually polished or improved some parts of it in order to make it look better would have been a normal practice in the Renaissance. And I doubt very much that he was responsible for carving this statue from the beginning. It's composed of multiple large blocks of marble, so he would have had to move these blocks, and the task of carving this figure without anybody knowing it would seem almost impossible.
William believes that proof of the artist's identity can be found in the archaeology of a Roman villa, 120 kilometers south of Rome.
And here we are in Sperlonga, an area much favored by the Roman elite. And this is by far the most impressive of all the imperial villas built here. In 1957, sculpture groups were found in the Greek cave here, and it was the largest group of Greek sculptures found in almost 1,000 years.
The figures depict episodes in the life of Greek mythic hero Odysseus, who was among the troops in the fall of Troy.
All the sculpture has been removed from the grotto and put into the modern museum for conservation purposes. The most dramatic group was the scene of Odysseus attacking the monster Polyphemus, or Cyclops, driving his spear into the eye of this one-eyed monster, set in this absolutely natural, theatrical-like grotto, essentially a Roman Disneyland.
There is a connection to Laocoon here. On one piece of sculpture, which stood in the middle of this pond, William finds a key piece of evidence.
Right here, on the front of the tiller, the Sperlonga group is signed by the 3 artists who actually carved this entire group of sculptures.
These are the same names that Roman writer Pliny says carved the famous antique Laocoon. But it isn't just the artist's signatures that finally convinces William.
For me, as an art historian, the fragment of the Sperlonga group that most emphatically reminds me of the head of Laocoon in the Vatican is this detail of Odysseus. And it's particularly in the deep-set features, the open mouth, the exaggerated hair, and the expression of pain on the face of Odysseus. It reminds me very much of the face of Laocoon in the Vatican.
As the legend tells us, the Greek Odysseus devised the ruse of the wooden horse that brought down Troy and its brave priest, Laocoon. 2 opposing heroes in one of the greatest stories in history. Laocoon immortalized in one of the world's greatest sculptures. There are stories behind every object at the Vatican Museums, on the walls, the ceilings, and hidden away in dim corridors. You may not see them at first, but if you take a closer look, the secrets are revealed, and they never cease to astonish.